All right, everybody, let's give one more round of applause for tonight's screening of Memphis Made, the Marc Gasol documentary, ahead of next week's jersey retirement of Marc Gasol. That jersey will hang from the rafters of FedEx Forum, right where it belongs. Excited to have a continued conversation now with some of those involved in this documentary, including to my left, director Michael Blevins. Applause for Michael Blevins. And we'll also talk with two of the featured voices from the documentary, Chris Vernon of The Chris Vernon Show on Grind City Media, along with columnist from the Daily Memphian, Chris Herrington. All right, so Michael Blevins, I want to start with you, director of this film, and something like this is so comprehensive, especially with someone like Marc Gasol, to go from him learning the English language thanks to Project Pat. That's going to be the new story. We're going to stick with it, but obviously from his playing days, rapping with such a nice emotional ending of finally winning a ring, even though it's away from Memphis, but having grit and grind in that ring. What was your process like? How do you approach this? You get the assignment. Where do you go from there?
So we had a potential idea that we were going to do Marc this year in the summer, and I started talking to him about it. And as you see in the documentary, I think if I could think of the meanest thing someone could do to Marc is make a documentary about him that's an hour and 45 minutes. He has to watch it. So he told me at the time, I'm not the best in terms of realizing like who you should talk to, different stuff like that. So we got like a short list, and it's Summer League. Me and I want to give a shout out to my whole group that worked on this: Steph, Eric, Corinne, Courtney, Ricky, Justin. And me and Steph were at Summer League, and we just started stocking up interviews. So you see like Conley's interviews at Summer League, Danny Green. And one of the things that struck me with this, and it was the same thing with Zebo, and you see with the Kevin Durant thing, is a lot of these guys that we know the guys that played with him respect him, but the guys that played against him respect him a lot. It's like Danny Green. For people that know Las Vegas, he walked over from the Wynn to Resorts World in the middle of the day when he had like a 20-minute window to come do the interview because he's like, oh, I got to be part of the Marc Gasol thing. So we got him, we got Zebo, we got Chris Wallace at Summer League. And as the year progressed, you know, we flew to L.A., the Bay Area, we got Powell, we got Johnny West, and we started stacking up a bunch of interviews like that. And then at that point, once you get all the interviews, you got to pull back a bunch of footage. So most of the stuff is digitized, and we had done it with Zebo, but pulling back old tapes and discovering little things like that, and then that adds to some of the interviews you're going on. It's a big process, and the hope was that it would be all-encompassing, that you would understand. I think when I started editing it, the hope was you understand why he got that in his ring, why he got grit and grind in his ring, and you see what the city meant to him and what that team meant to him and those other three guys. And that was kind of like the driving force behind it all. But yeah, it was a big process, and you know, if he can stand to watch it, hopefully he likes it. He has not seen it yet, so we shall see.
I think he'll like it quite a bit. Chris and Chris, two people who have known Marc Gasol, have covered Marc Gasol for so long. Chris Herrington, you mentioned seeing him and West kid running around the pyramid at those early days of the games. But I'm curious for both of you, when a jersey retirement happens, you know you're going to talk about that player quite a bit, and you know a documentary is coming down the pipeline. I'll start with you, Vernon. What story were you most excited to share and reflect upon when it comes to Marc Gasol?
You know, I would say it was interesting. In regards to the movie, I lived through so much of the basketball stuff, just being at those games and being around those teams and helping broadcast those, that stuff, the thing I am left with the most is honestly the whole open arms deal with saving that lady's life, and then the footage of the St. Jude stuff. Like, that's the stuff that I did not have access to, right? I wasn't around for that. And I think that at the end, it wraps it up very well. I think, honestly, it's not an individual thing rather than an all-encompassing, you know, I think about this a lot because we watch games all the time, and obviously we're still at that arena all the time. And even with this current team, is that fans are okay if you come up short. But what they have no patience for, and rightfully so, is not giving it everything you've got. If you give it everything you got and you come up short, so be it. And he is like the embodiment of that, right? He never cheated you. If you paid for a ticket or if you tuned in, you stayed up late on a West Coast game, right? You knew this guy's never going to dog it. This guy's going to be playing every night. He wants to win badly every night. And so I think it's that like competitive nature that stands out the most rather than an individual thing. When honestly, if I think about him, I think about the shot against San Antonio because he hated Fizdale. I mean, and Fizdale ran that last play for him. I thought Fizz got it kind of easy, honestly. In this, I mean, it was mega tense.
And he wasn't alone. Mark just hated him the most.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was mega tense. Well, he had stripped him of the captaincy that year. And so it was almost like this perfect culmination. And that happened in FedEx Forum. And that's like a walk-off game winner in the playoffs. And we had already lost Tony. We're playing like Andrew Harrison and Wayne Selden trying to guard Kawhi Leonard with them. And it was the take that for data right after that it all happened. And so I think if it was a play, but more importantly, the whole winner thing. That he said he wanted to be remembered as a winner, and he conducted himself to be remembered as a winner. That's what I'd say.
That season was my first season in Memphis, and watching this documentary gives me a whole lot of context on why Marc Gasol was the way he was by the time we got to that season.
I think you bring up the winner part, and that was the thing where I asked the questions like, do you have to Mike, do you have a story? That's where the Brooklyn story came from. Mike was the first one to tell it, and everybody obviously knew it, and JB knew it too, that, do you have a story about how bad Mark wanted to win games? And then as I'm editing it, I'm like, Mark wanted to win, but what it comes down to, his best line and the most revealing one was the one about him versus Powell when they were kids. And it was like, I can curse, you say shit on your show all the time, right? So he says, I don't want to have that shitty feeling again when he loses to his brother. And Powell was very nice. He opened his house. We shot that at his house. But I can imagine Powell was not a delightful winner at like 12 years old. He sounded like he teased him and everything. And he's like, that's what made him. So I really think it was like an avoidance of that feeling. Like he hated losing so much more than he loved winning, I think.
What do you think about it? Is that what you think about that's like the signature play?
Yeah, I'm trying to. After the typical Vernon filibuster, I think I could remember Jessica's question. I mean, the open arms thing, which I learned much more about it in this than I knew at the time. That I was also struck by that. But to your question about what I thought of, that I could bring nothing to that. So I think of two things in terms of like the story part of the film, the story that's being told. The thing that I was probably deepest in, maybe even relative to other people, was the trade that brought him to Memphis. Because I went real deep into that when it happened, and I felt like ever since I've been the guy who's saying, actually, the legend's not true. Like everything that Chris Wallace said in this documentary, that's what he told me at the time before Marc Gasol ever played a game, and in fact, even more than he says here. Although he did make news to me, I did not know that Michael Heisley, before that, refused to part with $500,000 to get the rights to Marc Gasol. Not surprised by that. And so I could go on forever, and I have in various forums about that trade and the way it was misunderstood. But in a greater sense about Marc Gasol as a player, I sort of struggled with this when Michael interviewed me, more so than I did on the Zebo, or hope I can say this, on the Tony Allen, which is in a vault somewhere. When he asked me about those, it was easy for me to think of moments. Great moments of Zach, great moments of Tony. When he brought up Mark, I don't think of moments. I don't think of the game-winning shot and this quote and this. I think of sort of the totality of how he played, the style of basketball he played, and his expressiveness as a player, which was positive and negative. You saw the temperamentalness, in this documentary a lot. There was also a lot of joy that came out in how he played. I remember Marc Gasol, people have been around, all you guys probably watched him play. He'd cross, to sign of the cross. He'd kiss the basketball. All this just kind of stuff, this expressiveness that I associate with Mark and the joy of watching him play. And then just the way he played. Like, I remember him throwing high-low feeds to Zach Randolph that would roll like a bowling ball. Or when Tony Allen would cut, it would be a two-hand hard bounce pass. Or some of the stuff where he would just like throw an outlet pass like a butterfly, just sort of float down the floor. That stuff is what I remember way more than individual games or individual shots or any of that kind of thing.
And you bring up the moment thing. That was one of the things I asked him is like, no one could really come up with like a huge moment other than that San Antonio game. And obviously we lost the series. And he answered that, and he brought up an interesting bite. It didn't really fit in the documentary. and I told Dylan and Jaron about it, and they laughed very hard, and you'll understand why when I say it. He goes, I wish I would have shot more in hindsight. And you think about those, especially those last couple of years and different stuff like that. And then obviously, I think some of the Fizdale stuff at the time, people were viewing that maybe he was shooting too much if you think about that beginning of the year. And every other coach thought, maybe Marc should be shooting more. But you look at it now, like if he would have played in the game now, he would be shooting way more.
Marc Gasol paved the path that Nikola Jokic followed. And I'm not saying Marc would have been as good as Jokic if he had embraced that aggressiveness more early. But he could have been a 20-something point a game scorer early in his career without sacrificing the defense, without sacrificing everything else. He was reluctant to embrace the three-point shot because just the era he came up in. So if Marc Gasol came up today, he wouldn't be Jokic, but he'd be not that crazy far from it,
He talked about how much he said he liked the game better now. And it's so funny because that's not how he played, right? He wanted the ball moving around. He wasn't even the biggest fan of just throwing the ball into Zebo, right? He wanted some more action and stuff before it. That was one thing that struck me. And then again, that didn't really fit in the documentary. There were different times when we were talking. This is kind of off topic of this, but he would refer to the city as like we and us all the time. And I couldn't tell what he was talking about certain times. Is he talking about 2013? What is he talking about? And he had one line where it's like, it was really hard to get to the next level. And you get to a certain level and you're like the conference finals, second round or whatever, and then get to the next level, right? And then he goes, we had to take a step back. And I'm thinking, is he talking about 2014? And then it becomes apparent he's talking about the Grizzlies now, where he's like, we had to take a step back those couple years. And he's like, we're more talented now. And he was adamant about that and that we're a better team now. And he just looks at it like he still lives here. Like he watches a team like that. His dad told me as we were sitting down for the interview, he still gets all the alerts for the Grizzlies games on his phone. So like he is still with this team.
Well, and I think that's such a perfect part of like the essence of Marc and the connectivity. And Chris, you both know covering sports. We talk about legacy excessively, sometimes too much when it comes to players in various sports. But when it comes to Marc Gasol's legacy, I thought one of the more touching things is thinking about what a championship parade would have been, and you get the cartoon graphic with it, and I know everybody in this room can find themselves fantasizing about a day that there is a championship victory parade in the great state of Memphis. But when it comes to how Gasol can still be connected, and you listen to those bites from Jaren Jackson Jr. later in the documentary and understand how Jaren was touched by being able to play with Marc Gasol and learning from that. How do you see Gasol still having a potential hand in if and when the Memphis Grizzlies win a championship one day?
I mean, I think that he's obviously still present in terms of he's clearly rooting. I mean, he's still liking all of our posts on Instagram and Twitter and everything
Josh
else.
shoes.
Yeah,
Remember
right.
he wore Josh?
He's wearing Josh shoes. So, I mean, I think he's always going to be present. I also think he has remained in contact with organization, right? And I think that, regarding that whole thinking about the parade and everything, I think the big part is the growing up here and knowing how important that. I mean, he lived through the bad times, and that's the best part about being a sports fan is going through all of the struggle and knowing what the payoff is. And some guys don't have that historical reference point, when they're thinking about a franchise. He does. He was here literally from the very beginning. There has never been a Memphis Grizzlies season that has been played that did not include Marc Gasol either playing on the team or in the arena rooting on the team until, he went to Toronto.
And I think, and then you could say like, because I forget what it is, but it's like you either have a Gasol or a Jackson or a Morant or somebody on the team. And one of the interviews, we interviewed Santi, and Santi talked about some of the stuff. And I think you see it with Dylan and Jaren. They look at it different now because they're the veterans, right? So when those young guys are there, they don't really understand it. Like Dylan says, he just thought he was an a-hole. But they look at it now, and Santi brought up a good point, like the stuff that Marc taught Dylan and Jaren, like they now teach us. Like it's passed on. And it's either Gasol or a teammate of Gasol the entire time here. And I think Dylan, a lot of the stuff that Dylan and Jaren and Dez and John and them do is not dissimilar from what Marc was trying to do.
Well, and honestly, just having that number up in the rafters, that has a profound impact, right? All the players, when you look up, when you got some numbers in your rafters, now you want to know about like why Zebo was so important here, why
You wanna
Mark
be
was
up
so
there
important
someday
here.
yourself.
Right.
Well, Mark got traded in season, but everyone thought Mike was going to get traded at the same time, and ended up Mike stayed through the end of the season. He was the last man standing, got moved the next summer. But everyone thought he was going to get traded. Mike thought he was going to get traded, and I know, like days before that trade deadline, because they related after the game, they both talked about it. Mike in particular talked to. I was standing there. I remember in the locker room talking to Mike about it. He said, he pointed over to Jaron across the locker room. He said, I've talked to Jaron. I've told him, like, you're going to carry this on. And you're going to be the guy, like I'm going to be gone, and you're going to be the guy who's going to be leading this team. And that sense of passing the baton, like I don't know about Mark, but Mike was like consciously trying to impress that on Jaren Jackson Jr. that season when he thought they were out the door.
I was talking to one of our young guys, current guys, after a game, and he was asking like, "Hey, when was what years was Mike?" Blah blah blah, and I was like, we traded Mike like a day before we drafted Ja, and he was like shocked. Because this doesn't happen. And you look at it and you're like, oh, I wish Zebo and Tony stuck around longer. Like, this thing landed perfectly. Like, you don't have that where you can just go and not bring back some of your veterans, and within 2 years, you have the framework of a team that can compete like that. Like, it landed perfectly, and it's a marvel that we're able to do that, honestly.
Well, and like even when we do the jersey retirement, all those guys that are on this team now, they're going to see how that crowd reacts to him, in the same way that it was just about a week and a half ago when we played against the Wizards, and Tyus got that ovation, and the other players on the Wizards team were like, damn, they really love you, right? Because it was like what? Why are they going crazy for Tyus Jones? Now just imagine the impact it's going to have on those players when they see the ovation that this guy is going to get. I mean, they're going to see that outpouring of love, and I do think that also then encourages new players to develop a bond with the city or to become as beloved as they're seeing this guy became.
You both mentioned the open arms portion of the documentary, one of the most touching parts, and just really shows who Marc Gasol is as a person in completion. I'm so curious, how did you get in touch with the woman that he ended up saving her life or helping save her life?
So, Chris would attest to this. He didn't really talk about it. Like he came back.
It happened like during the summer.
It happened during the summer before. It was after the first Fizdale year, I believe.
Yeah.
And no one in the organization knew. And the ESPN did a story on it. ESPN was very gracious. They gave us a bunch of raw footage with it. And I talked to Mark and his people and said, I want to reach out to Open Arms. And before that, we did the interview, by the way. The Mark interview was at the Mohegan Sun at the Basketball Hall of Fame when Powell was going in. So we interviewed him for like 2 hours. We got a suite. He has never done a 2-hour interview. I think y'all both can attest to that.
Never.
And he's never been that candid about it, about anything. Like he told me at one point, ask me any question you want. And you see that with some of the different topics. So I asked him about Open Arms. I'm like, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. And he, talked about it for a long period of time. He remembered the woman's name. He said, oh, she's in Switzerland now. She's getting ready to get married. So we reached out to Open Arms. Hey, can we talk to the founder? So we talked to the founder. And then afterwards, it's a delicate situation because, like, you don't want to be like, oh, we're doing this little documentary. Can, we open up old wounds? But they said the woman that they had saved, they usually don't keep in touch with the people that they save, but they do with her. And they wrote like a book about her, like a little children's book. She's in Switzerland getting ready to get married, and we interviewed her, and she was just so outgoing, able to talk about everything, was so happy, joked about different stuff. And like I was telling Jessica earlier, it's like you think about like the little stuff that bothers you during the day and you get grumpy or whatever about it, and this person has gone through hell and is willing to talk about it. But she said, she'll sometimes see him in the news, like when he won the championship. When he won the championship, he opened up, or he invited a couple people that were on the boat with Open Arms to come to Toronto for it. But she kind of kept up with it, and obviously that's a big issue in Europe, and that was the thing that Mark talked about, is like putting more pressure on these European countries to do stuff. And I think when he told the story, I remembered exactly. I don't know if anybody else remembered that, the photo of the Syrian young boy on the beach, and how it was just so big on Twitter during that time. And it was really like, he was honest. He saw that photo and was like, what can I do about this? And the wildest thing, obviously the interview was great, but the open arms, the founder saying he steered the boat for 11 hours after it. That's like, it was wild. I don't know if that's like maritime law, if that's legal, if a NBA center can steer a boat like that, but they allowed it.
I know we're on a bit of a time crunch, so I did want to give you the opportunity. I asked you how long the original copy of this documentary was. You said only 10 minutes longer than what it all ended up being. But what got left on the cutting room floor? What's something that didn't make it?
All of my awesome interviews.
Chris Vernon, what got left out from your awesome interview?
I don't remember.
Herrington hinted at it, but Verno's going to be in a lot of the Tony one, so rest assured. I believe we shot 2 different interviews for that one.
Yeah.
Lionel told a great story. Again, Lionel was the one where when you're doing something like this, you don't want to have really long-winded stories, right? The Jaren stuff, my 2 favorite segments are him talking about his competitiveness, because he talked about it in such detail, and it wasn't like, oh, I just want to win. It was like the downside of it and everything. And then the Jaren stuff, it was very like, he kind of passed the torch when at the moment we were kind of like, oh man, this is so dysfunctional. But talking about the competitive stuff, Lionel told a story, and he told great stories during it. But one of them that we cut just because it was just so long was he said during a game, like his rookie year, he came up to Marc, and Marc was just on the bench. You see it, you can probably guess what his face looked like. He was so pissed about something. And Lionel said he came over and slapped him in the face and said, what are you going to do, just quit? And he's like, I probably couldn't do that nowadays. But yeah, we kind of had to cut that. But I mean, there wasn't a whole lot we cut. I mean, we did like
could have
30
done
minutes.
another 5 minutes easy on the full-throated joint campaign Verno and I ran against the Hashim Thabit pick in real time.
That's for certain.
There was. We did cut a little bit from the.
Did you try to get him? Did you try to get the beat for the?
I believe he's playing like in the Philippines or something like that.
I doubt it. Yeah, he's in a mall.
Yeah, we probably could have got
Galleria.
Tony. I think Tony could have talked a lot. He's told some great The Beat stories on air. And then, yeah, I think the Tony one we're going to have to cut probably a lot from it. My favorite thing, hopefully he isn't bothered by this, but I was telling Dave Yeager after his interview. And again, it was great because it was like Dave Yeager was willing to do the interview right after their shoot around when we played them, a few weeks ago. And he said, I said, we're going to do this for Tony, so we're probably going to want you an interview for that. And he's like, his documentary is just going to be a roast. People just telling stories and everything. So, and this Marc one, I wanted to make sure it felt like Marc, where it was about the team. He was so much about the team, and that it felt like it wasn't just like Marc did this, Marc did this, Marc did this. It was more about, the people around him that kind of molded him and everything. So, yeah.
I think you did a beautiful job. Marc Gasol, Memphis made. I could listen to you all tell stories about Marc Gasol all night, but Chris Vernon, I know you will continue to tell stories about Marc Gasol on the Chris Vernon Show on Grind City Media tomorrow at noon. Chris Herrington continues to write for the Daily Memphian. You'll be on the Jeff Calkins Show tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, I believe, as well. So you can, at 10, sorry. I'm on at 10 o'clock on the Jeff Calkins Show on 92.9. But again, everybody, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. It's so exciting to share these moments, and we so appreciate your support of the Memphis Grizzlies year in, year out this season. It's been a tough one, but you get some really bright spots along the way, and one of those is going to be next Saturday night when Marc Gasol's number 33 hangs from the rafters at FedEx Forum. We will see you all there. A big, big thanks to FedEx for making tonight possible. Go Grizzlies forever, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your night.